Hey, it's Doug from Backcountry Pilgrim, a channel all about hiking, camping, backpacking, and the gear that goes with it. As you can see, I have started a sticker wall. So if you have a YouTube channel dedicated to hiking, camping, or backpacking, or all of the above, and you want to exchange stickers, take a look in the description of the video below. I have my email down there. Hit me up, and we will get a sticker exchange going. But the main thing that I want to talk to you about today is why you should not listen to hiking YouTubers, and why you should. Okay, let's get this out of the way up front. I realize that I myself am a hiking YouTuber, and therefore to say that you should not listen to hiking YouTubers makes no sense. Since I am a hiking YouTuber, if you listen to me telling you not to listen to hiking YouTubers, it would mean that you don't listen to me telling you not to listen to hiking YouTubers, in which case you would listen to hiking YouTubers.
So I can clearly not choose the wine in front of me.
But the title of this video is not just clickbait to get you to watch it. That is why I added, and why you should, to the end of it. Because after a couple of years doing this, I have come to realize that there are some times when you should not listen to hiking YouTubers, and sometimes that you should. So, being able to tell the difference is obviously important. It was about 3 years ago that I started doing research online to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. Now, because I had already done a lot of hiking and some backpacking, I figured that looking at hiking YouTube channels would be a good way to get some gear ideas, find out what kind of new stuff was out there, and it would be a great gateway into my preparation for the Camino. And because of the way the YouTube algorithm works, I found pretty much the same channels that many of you probably did when you started looking up hiking YouTube channels. I watched Darwin, I watched Dixie, Dan before he was such a big deal, and I even watched some channels with people whose names did not begin with D. I went out and pretty much bought everything that I found these guys recommending. I ended up with some gear that I probably never would have discovered had I not been watching YouTube hikers. But I also ended up with some gear that I probably never would have if I hadn't watched YouTube hikers. So yes, I have quite a few success stories from listening to YouTube hikers and trying out the gear that they like, but I also have some not so great gear stories based on the exact same method. So how do you tell the difference between when you should pay attention to a YouTube hiker and when you shouldn't? Now, I'm not going to make you wait until the end or pull any of those tricks to get extra view time.
I'm just going to go ahead and tell you the basic principle and then give you a bunch of examples.
But before we get to that, I'd like to talk to you about today's sponsor. Just kidding. What I have come to realize is that there are many different kinds of hiking, camping, and backpacking, and problems arise if you are paying attention to a YouTube hiker that does one or more of those things in a different way than you do. There are many times where there are crossovers in styles such that what works in one style works in another, and in those times, everything's great. But there are other times where gear recommendations are really based more on a specific style, and if that is not yours, you could run into trouble. For example, the way I figured it, a through hiker probably knew a lot more about getting really good gear than someone who just went out on the weekends. But the problem with that theory is that today's hiking, camping, and backpacking gear is often so specialized that if you don't use it for exactly what it was made for, it's not going to work very well compared to other gear that is made for exactly what you're trying to do. So for example, let's look at the kind of gear that through hikers like to use. Typically, they want very lightweight gear. They're trying to cover a lot of miles in single days, and they just can't be weighed down by any ounces that don't need to be there. Now, this made perfect sense to me for the Camino or for backpacking. Of course, why would I ever want anything heavier than I absolutely needed? So I went out and got a very expensive, uber lightweight backpack, and I pretty much couldn't stand it. The problem I came to realize is that ultralight backpacking really requires an entire gear setup that I didn't have. I had weekend warrior kind of gear, and I was trying to get it all crammed into a 40-liter ultralight Dyneema backpack that was not meant to carry that much weight comfortably. So for me, it just didn't work out. And as I started trying to lighten my gear load so that I could use an ultralight backpack, I realized that there are some serious compromises and sacrifices that somebody has to make if they want ultra lightweight gear. When you're considering gear, you basically have three things to look at. You can look at the weight, you can look at the price, and you can look at the durability. And generally speaking, you're only going to be able to choose two of those in your favor. Many thru hikers are willing to sacrifice money and durability to get every last ounce shaved off of their packs because that's the main thing they need to do on trail. Money is not as much of an issue for a thru hiker because if they go spend $600 or $800 on a tent, when you divide that by the number of days in a row they're going to be using that tent, it actually doesn't work out to be very expensive. Whereas for a weekend warrior, spending $800 on a tent that won't last as long as a $200 tent really makes no sense. And of course, if you're more of a camper, that changes everything because now you can get durable, handy, comfortable gear for very low price. It's not going to be very lightweight, but it doesn't matter because you're probably just taking it from the car, walking a few steps, and setting up a campsite. So just because some rock star YouTube thru hiker likes a certain backpack or a certain tent, that doesn't necessarily make it the best for what you're doing. Now, having said all that, if long-range thru hiking is your thing, then that is exactly the kind of advice that you want to get. Because you're doing the exact same thing as that particular YouTube hiker, probably their advice is going to be a lot more trustworthy because you guys are doing the same thing. The key is to know, when I click on this video, what kind of YouTube hiker am I looking at? Darwin and Dixie are going to probably tell you some pretty different things than Dan and Doug. And that's because Dan and Doug are not looking to spend 6 to 9 months on trail. We like to go out on the weekends, see some cool stuff, and be home in time to go to work tomorrow. Another pitfall that I fell into watching YouTube hikers was my shoe choices. So when I was looking at shoes to wear hiking, two of my favorite YouTube hikers both seemed to discover ultra footwear at about the same time. Now, they could not get enough of the Ultra Lone Peak, and their reasons made sense to me, so I got a pair. And I love them. In fact, I'm wearing some right now. But what I found was interesting was that a few videos later, Darwin was wearing Ultra Olympus shoes. And he decided those were the best because of how much more cushioning they had, better sole, etc., which made me think, oh man, I just dropped $150 on a pair of shoes, and now Darwin's telling me that there's a better pair out there that I could have had for nearly the same amount of money. I felt a little cheated. And then a few videos later, Darwin discovered the Ultra Temps, which he now thinks are the best shoes. Maybe he's onto something else. But the point is, in a very short period of time, Darwin went through 3 different models of shoe, each time proclaiming them the best ones that he'd ever worn. Now, if I didn't know who Darwin was and the kind of hiker he was, I might think that he was just trying to knock out gear reviews, but I would be wrong. What I came to discover about thru hiking is that they will often go through several different pairs of shoes in a single hike because they wear them out so quickly. And because they may end up in a town where not every model of shoe is available to them, or Amazon doesn't deliver, or something like that, they are constantly switching up gear because they just have to. And when they make a video about that new gear and it shows up in the video timeline, it may seem like they are just running through gear like there's no tomorrow, and that's because in a sense they are. Compared to someone like me that isn't going to wear out a pair of shoes for probably a year or maybe more, it seems ridiculous to have a new shoe every month or two. But that is the life of a thru hiker. And until I realized that, I wasn't sure how to understand what was happening. And shoes aren't the only time this has happened. I bought a headlamp based on Darwin's recommendation, and then he later changed it to another one. So here I am with a headlamp that for me would probably last me the rest of my life, and it turns out that it isn't actually the best one out there that I could have got. It's just that when I was shopping headlamps, I happened to click on Darwin's channel, and at that time, that's the headlamp he was using. But then he switched to a better headlamp, and because I didn't see that video until I bought mine, now I've got 2. On the other hand, though, I am buying with a lot more confidence knowing that Darwin likes these headlamps, because even if he found one that he likes better than his old one, I am quite sure that that older one worked well on trail. And that is because a thru hiker like Darwin is using his gear a lot more than I do. And so if there was a problem with it, he would have discovered it pretty quickly and moved on to another piece of gear or said so in his videos. And because Darwin is not sponsored, he's not afraid to say that he doesn't like something. In fact, I think every year Darwin comes out with a video talking about the gear that he's getting rid of and what he is swapping it out for. So again, although you have to be careful about who you are watching and make sure that they are doing the kinds of things you're doing when you consider their gear recommendations, a good reason to watch them is because certain kinds of hikers are going to go through gear a lot faster and have a lot more options, and so their gear recommendations can be pretty darn trustworthy. A lot of other factors come into play depending on the kind of hiking, camping, and backpacking that you do and how it affects your overall gear experience. So for example, if you're a thru hiker and you have a very tight kit, you've worked it down to a very lightweight load, you can wear different kinds of shoes than someone who has a very heavy weekend warrior type pack. When you don't have as much weight pushing down on your body, you can get away with shoes that don't have as much support. So for example, somebody like Dixie, who's a triple crowner and does these really long trails pretty much for a living, she has her kit so dialed in that she just doesn't really need the kind of footwear that somebody who doesn't hike very much and has a really heavy pack weight is going to need to take care of themselves. Dixie is also going to be in a lot different shape than someone who is not able to hike as much as she is. Her body is going to be a lot more prepared to deal with the strains of backpacking and hiking than someone who only gets out a couple times a year. And that simply means that she is going to have different gear needs and gear experiences than someone who doesn't hike like she does. There's also an issue of experience. Certain kinds of gear are just more difficult to use than others. For example, in my Getting Started Backpacking series, when I talked about shelters, I recommended a freestanding tent over a non-freestanding tent and either tent over a hammock, simply because the setup is a lot more complicated, you have a lot more choices you have to make, and a lack of experience can make it very difficult to make those decisions until you have some experience with them. And so even though your favorite YouTube hikers might all be hammock hangers, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea for you to jump into it. However, if you do decide that you want to jump into it, watching hammock hanger videos is one of the best ways to learn because you are watching people that have already had the experiences, made the mistakes, learned the lessons that you're trying to learn. And if you can kind of get a jump start on that, your experience with a hammock or a tent or whatever you decide to do is probably going to be a lot better. So if you think the hiking YouTuber that you are watching has made good gear choices that match the kinds of things that you want to do and the kinds of things that you are prepared to do, that's perfect. That's exactly what those videos are made for. However, if you are not doing the kinds of things that hiking YouTuber is doing and you don't have the experience or the fitness level, you want to factor that in to your decision. When you are considering a hiking YouTuber's style and fitness level and experience, you also want to look at where they hike. Hiking a long, fairly flat dirt trail is very, very different than climbing up a granite-strewn mountain. The fact that someone has put thousands of miles on certain pieces of gear doesn't necessarily tell you how they are going to perform on a different kind of terrain. So again, going back to Darwin, he really liked the Ultra Temps. Personally, I hated the Temps. It wasn't that they weren't comfortable, and it wasn't that they didn't have a good ride, but the soles were the slipperiest, non-grippy shoe soles I have ever worn. And for me, someone who spends a lot of their hiking time in the Sierra mountain range in California, which is basically made of granite, a slippery sole is no good. So if I was going to be cruising the Appalachian Trail, I could definitely see throwing on a pair of Temps. However, I would never take them into the Sierra. All right, let's get into the darker side of YouTube and talk about sponsorship, ads, and paid promotions. It's no big secret that people with YouTube channels eventually start getting offers of free gear to review on their channels. Now, some people embrace that, some people fight it. I know that one of my favorite gear reviewers, Luke, over at the Outdoor Gear Review, does not do sponsorships, does not do free gear. Well, that's not exactly true. He gets sent a lot of free gear, but he gets sent it by his viewers. And I admit, Psychologically, it makes me trust him a little bit more, knowing that he doesn't have any stake in the game. He's not making any money off of his reviews, whether they are good or bad. Rather, he is making his income through Patreon supporters and YouTube views, which he gets a lot of because he does excellent work. Others have jumped into the YouTube sponsorship game. They are not only doing free gear reviews, but they're even doing paid ads in their video. And I'm not just talking about the ones that YouTube puts in front of videos. In fact, if you didn't know it, YouTube can do that even if the creator doesn't want them, and even if they're not making anything on them. I'm talking about actually making commercials for companies that they just insert right into the middle of the video, regardless of what else they're doing. And beyond the one-off, hey, why don't you make us a quick commercial, there are people that are literally getting paid to make YouTube videos, not by YouTube or by their viewers or by sales through affiliate links and that sort of thing, but they are actually getting paid by certain companies. And let's face it, there's just no way you're going to be critical of a company like that on YouTube when you're getting paid to represent the company. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that these guys are sellouts. If somebody really truly believes in a product and they would have said exactly the same thing about it, whether they were getting paid or not, making some money is a little nice. Getting paid to do YouTube frees you up to buy more gear, which means more reviews, which means more help for the viewers. It also means you're going to have more money to invest in good equipment. You're going to have more time to spend on editing. That income can raise the quality of your videos in a number of ways, and all of that can translate into making better content for your viewers. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're a smaller channel and you're just a regular person that doesn't necessarily have a whole lot of money to invest in your channel, getting free gear is pretty much the only way you're going to be able to keep up a regular review schedule, because you can't just keep buying more and more jackets and more tents and more shoes to keep up with the demand. So in those cases, when somebody offers to give you a free piece of gear to review, why wouldn't you take it? The obvious problem with receiving free gear is that it's very tempting to do a glowing review over a piece of gear that maybe is only mediocre and is probably something you wouldn't have even bought. I know when I was first getting started and people started sending me free gear, some of it I reviewed because I thought I had to, because they sent it to me. I pretty quickly learned that this was not a road I wanted to go down, and so I made a set of rules for myself, some guidelines for reviews that I share with everybody that wants to send me gear for review. And one of the most important parts of that is that I tell them that, hey, if I can't, in all honesty, give your product a good review, I will let you know, and then I just won't review it. So for me, I think it's worked out fine. Again, I get it. Some people are very strongly against any kind of sponsorship or even just getting free gear for review. They want to buy absolutely everything so that they can feel objective. I don't personally feel that I need to do that to remain objective, given my guidelines, but I respect those who do. People who receive free gear or sponsorships are supposed to let you know that in the video or in the description. That's not just best practices, that's actual YouTube policy. So you should be able to tell whether or not someone is reviewing a free piece of gear or not, and then you can decide how much that matters to you, how much you trust that person. But one thing to consider is that even someone who's getting something for free, even someone that's getting sponsored, if they are an honest person, this might be the best way that they can get their hands on this gear. And if they didn't do it, those gear reviews wouldn't exist and you wouldn't have videos to watch on that gear for your consideration. So again, it's kind of a balance. You got to be careful both ways. The last thing that I want to point out about not listening to YouTube hikers and listening to them is the kind of clickbaity titles that you see sometimes. Now, technically, clickbait is not simply making a preview thumbnail that makes people want to click on your video. If you don't do that, people aren't going to click on it, they're not going to see the video, and what's the point of making the video? Rather, clickbait is when you promise something in your title or your thumbnail that you don't deliver in the video. And I have to say, I have found that to be pretty rare in the hiking YouTube community. Instead, what I see are a lot of titles like this: the top 5 tips nobody tells you about, 3 things you don't know about, 10 items you must have for backpacking. Many times I've noticed that videos like this turn out to be kind of recycled material from the past, and they indicate to me that the YouTuber has just sort of run out of ideas and they're trying to find something to put up. Now, just because somebody uses a title like that doesn't mean that the content is bad. Where it becomes a problem is when people use these titles to make it sound like these 5 things or these top 10 things are basically all you really need to know in order to be successful with your hiking, camping, or backpacking. Just keep in mind that many times these top lists are not actually referring to the most important things. The title is just kind of being put out there because it's clicky. All right, well, I hope this video has helped you out in your discernment of when you should listen to a YouTube hiker and when you shouldn't. If I gave you some good information here and helped you out, would you mind giving the video a like? And if you are not a subscriber to Backcountry Pilgrim and you want more cool videos like this, hit that subscribe and click the bell so that YouTube will tell you when new videos come out. Until next time, I am Doug. This is Backcountry Pilgrim. Thanks for watching.